Before we begin tonight, I would like to humbly acknowledge the Lenape peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. My name is Lily Horner, and I'm the membership coordinator at InLiquid. Welcome to the virtual artist talk for Design for Living. This exhibition is on view until April 3rd at the InLiquid Gallery. Design for Living features Philadelphia-based artists and longtime friends, Mary Henderson and Sarah Zwerling. The exhibition features bodies of work the artists began prior to 2020, which they have reworked and recontextualized in response to the events of the last year. Although Henderson's imagery includes only figures, while Zwerling's consists exclusively of landscapes and architectural details, the formal similarities in their work are sometimes striking through their exploration of visual pathmaking and repeating shapes to navigate through complex formations of figures and natural structures. The artists have also provided miniature archival prints as a thank you gift to visitors in the hopes that you will enjoy and take home a physical work of art at a time when so many of our interactions are confined to virtual spaces. You can visit the gallery to view the exhibition and pick these up for yourself or for a friend. To learn more and make an appointment to see Design for Living, you can find the link to our website in the chat box. To begin, I'd like to welcome artists Mary Henderson and Sarah Zwerling. Afterward, Mary and Sarah will share some images of their work and go on to discuss the exhibition with one another. Mary Henderson is a visual artist living and working in Philadelphia. Henderson teaches painting and drawing at St. Joseph's University, and she is also a co-director for the Philadelphia site of the nonprofit network of artist-run spaces, Tiger Strikes Asteroid. Henderson received an A.B. with honors in fine arts from Amherst College, an MFA in painting from the University of Pennsylvania. She has exhibited nationally and has been awarded a Pennsylvania Council on the Arts Individual Artist Fellowship, a PCA SOS grant, and residencies at the Gentile Foundation at the Hambidge Center. Sarah Zwerling is a Philadelphia-based multidisciplinary artist who explores her personal relationship with the natural and built environment through processes of photo collage, sculpture, and installation. Zwerling received her MFA from the University of Pennsylvania and her BA from the San Francisco State University. Zwerling has exhibited nationally as well as completed site-specific commissions for the Philadelphia International Airport and Comcast Technology Center, among others. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mary and Sarah.
Hi.
Thanks for coming.
Well, hello, everybody. I see some familiar names, and I'm really excited that you're here. I'm so excited about tonight. And we're going to share some images and then ask questions. Okay, so I wanted to just start back with these two images because I have a little story. And I just want to say again, I met Mary when I moved here in '99 to go to grad school, and just have been like inspired and admire everything that Mary does. And I think she's like really helped push me to continue working in the arts. And every single project I've ever done, including my first year of grad school, I like go to Mary and kind of fall apart, and she's like, you can do this. And when she asked if we could do the show together, I was so excited and touched. And I made this sketch, the one on the right, and I said, I'm thinking, I always have to ask her for everything that I'm thinking about to make sure it's okay. And I said, I'm thinking of titling this Reach. And she said, oh, wow, my painting on the left is titled Pull. And I just was like, this is so magical, the way that like I'm always like reaching for her, and like she's just pulling me along, and like I don't know, she's gonna not agree with everything I just said, but I do just feel like, especially this crazy year, so grateful and just wanted to say thanks, and like love that these titles just worked so beautifully together. So we decided we're gonna start. I'm gonna show a couple images that sort of inspire me to make work, and then some of Mary's earlier work, and then vice versa. So I'm going to start with some photographs. See if this works. Okay. So I'm going to start. These are photographs that I've taken. They're not, I don't consider them art, but they're like moments that I use my camera or my phone now where I take a picture just to kind of remind me of the things that I like to look at. So like here on the left is this fallen tree, and it was a big tree after a storm on our street. And it really wasn't about the event or the tree or the street or what street it was, but it was like, I just kind of zoomed into all of those spaces in between and those converging lines. And like, that's kind of where, like what I'm always seeing, I'm kind of like zooming into these constructions and shapes and what's beyond that. So on the right is another kind of example of that. That is the Eiffel Tower. And again, like I didn't really care about anything except for like what I was seeing in between those constructions. Oops, I'm going the wrong direction. And here are some examples. These are kind of current photos of constructions that are actually going on around our neighborhood in West Philadelphia, and how like I just love looking at the city, and how I love living in the city. I've always lived in a city, and how these kind of constructions are filling up these empty spaces, skylines. What happens to the empty space, and how and then also just like I love all these kind of structural kind of, I mean, I guess my background's in sculpture, so maybe these things kind of interest me. And then the other thing that has been kind of reoccurring are the connecting cables that bring us together in a city, and when we're all kind of living apart, but these lines that sort of like, you know, bring us together and connect the electricity and the communication to us. And this is another example of city living and kind of paying attention to those layers and constructions and the time and textures and things that change over time. And then these, I'm going kind of quick. I hope I'm not going too quick. But these two pictures, I think that Lily said this, my background is in installation and sculpture. And so I'm continuously also just finding spaces that I kind of want to revisit or re-enter, and how can I bring those into my work. And so I take these pictures, one's in Chestnut Hill and one's in Rome, and they were just like kind of stop, you know, as a place that I just always kind of want to remember, and how can I build those kind of, even when I'm working two-dimensionally in these prints, how can I create these kind of deeper spaces that you want to kind of re-enter or rethink about. Okay, so those were some of my photos from around and mostly in the city. And now I'm going to just show some artists that I've been inspired by. And I'm going to start with dance and music. And dance has been something that like I've loved as a kid. I loved watching. This is Pina Bausch, who I really loved. But I mean, I'll watch any kind of dance. And I just love like the way that you know, bodies move through space, how they, you know, they create form, they pull together, they pull apart, and so I'm like constantly looking at these kind of forms and in a more like organic way. And okay, and then this is artist Oliver Eliasson, and he's working with. This is called the Model Room, and he works with Einar Thorstein, building these structures. And I think it kind of connects to my sculpture, but also all the architectural elements that I showed at the beginning. And something I really love about these models that they make is that they're repeating shapes and creating forms that we know and that like they understand, but they talk a lot about how they're trying to build models and forms of the unknown. And so, you know, how to expand those shapes that we already know and like recreate new forms from them. And so, so I've just really been inspired by that. And Ruth Asawa, I think I put her in because I just love her repeating shapes and the labor involved. And these are all hand knit metal wire structures, and so that repetitive kind of process, which is one of the things that I do within my own process. This is Pivolotti Wrists, And her work is really intimate, kind of surreal and emotional. And she does a lot of installation work, and I've just always been kind of moved by like the feeling and emotion of it. And something I like that she writes here is color is borderless, it's dangerous, it's emotional like music. And here are 2 pictures from her installations. And then I wanted to put these in because a couple of years ago, Mary, thank you again, kind of made me rethink of Dutch paintings and the way that I was kind of taking these photographs of pieces of nature and thinking of them as objects and reconstructing them, but also taking away the backgrounds. She reintroduced me to these, and I started thinking about how I can create those deeper spaces, and also I kind of like the mood of them, that there's like this sadness and also hopefulness to them. And then lastly, this woman, Mary Delaney, she's English. They're from 1700s, I think. And these are all paper. They look like paintings, but they're paper constructions, and she calls them paper mosaics, and she made almost 1,000 of them. And what I love about them is that they're not paintings, and they're made up of like all these little pieces. And when I'm thinking, a lot of times people say I'm doing photography, but my work is not photography. It's like finding those colors and shapes and light and figuring out how to reconstruct them into my own photography, I guess. And I still don't know how to define, it's not, what it is. Is it photo collage or is it a photography? But I think it's more like a paper mosaic. So those are some of the images that I'm inspired by. Okay, so this is Mary Henderson's work. Now I'm going to show some work of hers from her past. And these are paintings that were made, I think, a little bit after grad school. And she gave me the painting on the left, so I feel like I should put that in our house. And so there's so many things that I love about Mary's paintings, but one thing is like the way that she crops and makes us look closely at something. Another is just like all of the detail and the patterns and the color and the textures, and how every time you go to it, there's kind of equal importance to all of it. So you can spend time with just like the wicker texture of that chair behind, or that ripple in the glass that maybe reminds you of something. And so like every detail is there for you to find those moments. And again, this is kind of another example of some of her earlier paintings and those details. And then I also this is another example, but also thinking about how these fragments can kind of make you remember this time in your life or era. Like when I look at that ribbon, it kind of brings me back to some day in my own life, and like by the way that she sort of crops and takes those little sections can kind of make you recall those your own personal memories. And this one I just kind of love for all the reasons why I look through those layers and constructions and lines and shadows. And so I wanted to add this painting in. And here, what I think, so this one is, the left one is at Dave & Buster's. And so now Mary has the internet to look at images broadly, and she's always searching for new images. I don't know where she gets all of her sources, but in the beginning, when I first met Mary, it was a lot of her own home history works, things that she was able to gather. And then it slowly has been expanding, and now into this new work, it's really, it's not, it's really a way of connecting in a bigger way to people that maybe we don't always, know so closely or intimately. And before the internet, I think it must have been like we weren't be able to like mad search for images of photos. She took us to Dave and Buster's, treated us to some really bad food. I think I got a migraine, but what she did was we pretended to play video games so that she could walk around and take pictures of us, but that's not me. But it was like I was right there playing something else, and then she could get all of these source photos of people in the moment. And I just think that like we've really, we're in a new time now. So I wanted to add that little detail. And then one last detail is that we both grew up in LA. So this painting here has always been one that like that I really love. I grew up on the beach, and I guess something that I guess I want to leave with is like sometimes with Mary's paintings, I feel like maybe I'm in it, like maybe. When I'm looking at even her new pieces with the crowds, I feel like, well, maybe I know somebody there. Maybe I am a part of that crowd. And then there are moments where I really feel like this isn't me. This isn't my, like, these aren't my friends. But the way that she like lets us sit and hold on to some of those really beautiful moments, those details. It's like we're listening to them, we're feeling them, where I could like touch her hair or move with the sand. There's so many different entry points, or maybe just stare at the water or the bark on that tree. And that's like a way to connect with people when maybe you don't always feel like you're a part of this world, but like she brings us into like remembering that, oh, what am I trying to say? That's what I'm trying to say. It's just as like looking at the work now that Mary is doing is especially now after this year of kind of isolation, having that kind of those moments of feeling like you are with everybody and also not with them, but how can she draw us in? And I think her paintings just do this in like an amazing way. So that's it. That's my slideshow.
Oh my God, thank you so much. Okay, so I guess it's my turn, right?
Yes.
All right. That was so good. Now I'm nervous. So a year ago, the beginning of March of 2020, I was at an artist residency in northern Georgia. So there were 2 weeks where everything was slowly disintegrating, and I was like isolated in the mountains with very little connection to the outside world. And I was with these, artists and writers, and we joke that it was sort of like the Decameron, that all the people in a small group in Italy hiding from the plague and telling each other stories. And it really did feel like that, everything kind of unraveling around me. And you don't always know why stuff gets stuck in your head, but I think that it's pretty clear why I've been kind of obsessed with Renaissance painting recently. There's this funny parallel that from like Florentine painting and kind of what we're experiencing now. So this is Domenico Ghirlandaio. This is a painting that's in Santa Maria Novella in Florence. I studied in Florence in college, and like all of this sort of early Renaissance painting got burned into my brain and kind of reappeared in the last year. And I keep thinking about it. So much of the Italian Renaissance that we associate with these beautiful paintings is just painters who were surrounded by constant plagues and pestilence. So the thing that I love about Ghirlandaio, and I think the thing that sort of I strive for in my paintings, is his Madonna and child paintings, they're lovely, but there are these wonderful little moments where you can tell that he just got so fascinated by including these, like Florentine merchants in the corner, the patron or whatever, and his love for the individual as part of a crowd there's something so charming and tender to me about those paintings that really draws me in, and something that has stuck with me for the remainder of my adult life from the time that I studied there. Ghirlandaio, incidentally, was born right after an outbreak of the plague and wound up dying of the plague. This is another painting that I keep thinking about, or a group of paintings, the Villa of the Mysteries fresco cycle in Pompeii, which was painted, again, like at a time of incredible turbulence. It was during the sullen civil wars that took place. And it's one of my favorite works of art, just period, in history. It's about the Dionysian mysteries. It's like they think that it's a woman being initiated into a cult prior to her marriage. But it's so much about kind of, a group of people kind of pursuing a specific end. It's, quite literally about kind of, trying to achieve collective effervescence, but you're also so aware when you're looking at it of these distinct figures and them kind of having their own individual role. And the painting, for us in particular, because we don't know what was really going on, really just becomes about this kind of like reading a series of figures interacting and overlapping and trying to assign meaning based on gesture and physicality that is really important to me. This is a painting by Jacopo Pontormo from 1525, again, painted during a plague. But there's a way in which this painting feels sort of crowded and also infinite in its space. That's something that has always stuck with me and that I find so riveting. I think that like the palette is so beautiful, but it's the composition, I think, that I keep coming back to and that I think about all the time. More Italian painting, Caravaggio. Most of Caravaggio's family was killed by the plague when he was a child. So it's a sort of intermittent theme. These Italian Renaissance painters were surrounded by great drama. But this painting, I think about in particular in Caravaggio's work in general, the paintings are so like melodramatic and these like really over the top gestures. But at the same time, real life is full of moments like this where, some really strange and intense thing is happening among a group of people. And that's something that I've been inspired by both in art and in life. And it's fascinating to me to be able to kind of find these like Renaissance moments in just people's day-to-day activities. This is a painter, Louis Leopold Boilly, who painted through a really tumultuous period. He started out painting in France during the monarchy. He painted through the French Revolution. He painted through the Napoleonic era, through the Restoration, and so really saw this tumultuous society kind of changing around him, and made these incredibly hilarious paintings of just the people that he was inspired by in the streets. So just ordinary day-to-day people, sometimes painted, or rendered in a more kind of grotesque way, like on the right, sometimes in, a slightly more flattering but differently grotesque way on the left. And he's an artist that I keep coming back to again. His just fascination with with human beings and the way that they're interacting around him is something that I really identify with and am inspired by. So these are two early 17th century Mughal miniatures. The one on the left is an unknown artist, and the one on the right is Abul Hassan from 1620. Unlike most of the other paintings that I've been showing you, these were actually, I think, associated with a time of like peace and prosperity and riches and enlightenment. But the way that they're composed, the interaction of the figure and the ground, that painting in particular on the left, the way that the space is simultaneously flat but also kind of infinite, is something that I find so beautiful. The juxtaposition of pattern and flat space, just the exquisite contour line. This is work that I go back to over and over and over again. And then the painting on the right, again, that idea of kind of, you know, a tumultuous crowd where there's so much going on, as in some ways stylized as some of the figures are, you know, it's a little bit flatter in some areas. When you look, there's just this endless amount of stuff to look at, people's faces pointing in different directions, this incredible array of humanity, these beautiful gestures, this incredible kind of undulating line that you can trace through these crowds is really astonishing to me. And so it's so like beautiful and so delightful and so complex, as tiny as some of these pieces are. So a little bit more recent, Alice Neal is an artist who, you know, is formally quite different from me, but that kind of compassion and empathy in her work is something that I really strive for and would love to emulate. Just the, you know, the attention to these tiny gestures, the posture, the girl on the left, everything about it is so beautiful and so touching to me. Barclay Hendricks, who in some ways I think, you know, his project or what inspired him is so similar to like looking at that Ghirlandaio painting. Just he was so connected to people around him and so interested in their like basic humanity and dignity, and just for that, those paintings that he made in the 70s and 80s, like, you know, his project was about connection and just care and elevation of the people in his community. And I find all of his work so amazing, but this painting in particular, I really love the sort of slightly awkward composition of it. The color is obviously something that is really important to me in my work. That kind of like overall tone is something that I think a lot of contemporary artists have pulled from. I feel like so many of us go back to his work, so many of us who are involved in portraiture of any kind. Thinking about grad school, this is a Lisa Yuskevich painting. This is someone whose work was really influential to me. She came to visit Penn when Sarah and I were there. I didn't think she really hated my work, but I really enjoyed having her visit and having her be such a challenging voice as a critic. But there's something about that, the light in her paintings, the intensity of it, the subtlety of temperature shifts, you know, in this like overall red painting. It's something that's so difficult and complex, I think, to work in that really narrow bandwidth of color, and something that I go back to all the time. So speaking of graduate school, this is Sarah in grad school, a project that she worked on, you know, around the time when I first met her. She did this crazy performance where she made these silk organza bricks. And I think the thing that really first drew me to her as an artist was just the way that she would take on these incredibly huge, ambitious, crazy projects and kind of put her head down and do it like one brick at a time, like one stitch at a time. And somehow it would all get done and result in these really spectacular pieces. But when we were in grad school together, there was a room in the Graduate School of Fine Arts that you could book to, you know, shoot slides or whatever. And we would book it sometimes at night and just do these like quilting bees. We called them our worker bee parties. And I would bring little, you know, stack of little papers to do little like gouaches. And Sarah would just sit there and like, so. And it's something about that, like, that work ethic and just that willingness to just kind of go piece by piece to create something amazing and spectacular was so inspiring to me. And I think that's something that continues to be inspiring to me. Oops, I have a blank slide. Okay. This is a video piece of Sarah's. This is just a small section of it. But I think the way that her work for me always kind of contains the close up and the tactile, as well as kind of the infinite, and this horizon behind her. You know, you can't really, it's a cloudy day, you can't really see where the ocean starts. So you have this hilarious performance in front of you. And then this kind of flat composition, but also this sense of like endless space. And I feel like that's sort of the paradox that I love in Sarah's work, that it's simultaneously so much about the thing that's like 2 inches away from you, and also the thing that you can never get to, that's so far off. This is a still from an installation that she did many years ago at University City Arts League, where she made this beautiful blown sugar doll that she animated and projected in a dark space around her. And I think that, you know, I look at this, I think for most artists, you know, there are forms or aesthetics that we kind of revisit. And it's interesting because I think most of Sarah's recent work has been much more light filled, and this like dark, abrupt kind of chiaroscuro light in this painting, where she has this super black background and this strongly illuminated foreground, reminds me a little bit of the work that she has in this show, and the way too that it's like these incredibly fragile, delicate kinds of objects in the foreground, and then this dark, infinite space behind. I find it really, really touching and really beautiful. This is an installation that Sarah did at Fleischer, right? Fleischer Art Memorial, which is again one of those incredibly ambitious and intense kinds of projects that she, you know, kind of built brick by brick. It was this huge, beautiful installation with sculptural elements and video projection. But I also think about just the light and the color in this, and looking at my work in this show, and then going through some of Sarah's old work and thinking about the ways that her work has influenced me. This particular installation jumped out at me as one that I think has like also kind of seared into my brain. I think you know, that like overall kind of monochromatic, rich, lush color with these pops of another color that are so subtle, the way that it like slowly reveals itself to be more complex on additional viewing is something that I think that I'm constantly trying to get at in my own work. And I realized looking at this, how much that connects to work of Sarah's, and the way that she, you know, will seemingly work in a monochrome that's not really a monochrome, or something close to a monochrome that slowly reveals itself to be this much more like rich and lush and complex kind of color. This again, I think really speaks to that idea of Sarah's work being about, you know, both the immediate and the tactile and the fragile and the sort of infinite, the way that everything is kind of in similar focus, and the way that there's this kind of onslaught of beauty that becomes a little bit uncomfortable to look at after a while because everything is in such focus. It's, I think, kind of a hallmark of a lot of Sarah's work that might on first glance look more beautiful than it really is in a way. The sort of like, there's always like a discomfort to the beauty that I really like, this kind of like overwhelming quality. This is a piece, this is a major installation that Sarah did for the Comcast Center. And I wish that you haven't had the chance to go see this in person. It's something that you definitely don't want to miss. It does not reproduce the scale of it, the experience of being in this dark space with this kind of bright, luminous, like panorama around you. It's such a physical experience, not just something that you experience with your eyes, but you really, you know, your whole body kind of responds to it. And I think that idea of, you know, I mean, I guess that's what the sublime is, right? The idea of something that's sort, you know, is kind of beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The way that like it's so much and it's so overwhelming, you can't take it in all at once. You have to just go through piece by piece and find the parts that you respond to. And Sarah has told me that a lot of the security staff who works down there has sort of experienced it in that way, that they all have talked to her about like what their favorite part is. And I just love the way that it's so deceptively simple on like multiple levels. It's deceptively simple in its technique. You know, the incredible labor-intensive quality of it is probably only apparent to anybody who's done a lot of digital work, but also simple in the way that it feels sort of straightforwardly representational or photographic, but it's very much not. It's, you know, kind of this impossible, idealized, like dream version of walking through Philadelphia. This is another piece of Sarah's. This is a print that's connected to the next piece I'm going to show you, which was an installation that she did at the Vox building in Chinatown. This is a clip. And I love the way that this work is, again, sort of deceptively simple, you know, just you're panning up and you're looking outside at the city, but the way that it sort of subtly talks about change and gentrification in that neighborhood, while at the same time just being a kind of celebratory delight, is again like a kind of quality that I aspire to, a quality of you know, care and attention to your environment, to your community, and being celebratory of what's around you, but also, you know, allowing your feelings about your experiences to come in, and allowing that kind of, you know, maybe subtle social critique to enter in, but in a kind of like oblique, and very subtle and welcoming way. And I think that's the last piece.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. And so now we will be going through the gallery, and Mary and Sarah will talk about the exhibition Design for Living.
So yeah, I had a question for you but I wanted to wait until we got to your piece. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your process for shooting and composing, and also where you take your photos. I mean, I know that you have to stitch stuff together, but could you talk a little bit about how you get your source material?
Yeah, so for all of these images, they're around the city, and I usually go around with my phone first to find a place, and then I have to wait for a good, like a nice day, and you know, not rainy, not too cloudy, kind of like a more quiet sky. Can be any color, but and then I go back to that source, and I've been using this digital tripod where it's a tripod where you can program it to take a photo at the very top, let's say, of the tree, and then it pans in a grid form and makes about like 40 pictures for you. So every single photo of each tree is in focus. Because if I was to just take a picture of, you know, the tree with one click, then only like, you know, one little section or something in the foreground would be in focus. So I want to be able to have all these pieces that I can then chop up. And so, I mean, that's kind of how I take the picture, but then I have to seam them all together. And then in the brick by brick analogy that Mary said, how I just go one step at a time, I'm then going into the computer and taking all of these pieces, this photograph, but I don't really consider it a photograph. It's just like a tool to get those shapes and colors that I can then like move around in the computer after I cut them up. And as far as like where I go, it might be strange, but a lot of times I find myself in cemeteries because they're like these beautiful arboretums in the city. The trees are labeled and spaced out so that they can, you know, so the root system is not like all tangled up together. And so I can sort of stand back and get some really beautiful photographs of trees. And then I kind of make a conscious effort to find like a whole palette. And then some of my tree friends kind of make fun of me because I think somebody's on the call who's an arboretist. She knows a lot more about trees. I've read her book, but I really label everything like in colors. Like I don't know that much about trees, and it's really about like how, you know, the scale of something, and yeah, that's my process. Okay, so we look at one of Mary's. I guess one of my questions for you is how do you decide to eliminate the background? And also, are these composites, and if they are they referring to some historical painting? or yeah, that's my question.
So the elimination of the background, I think, was to kind of slow down the way that we read the painting. I wanted to take everybody out of context so you could just think about gestures and body language, and that idea that I was talking about earlier, that you can just kind of like weave your way through a complicated space and stop at interesting moments without making this quick determination of like, oh, I know what's going on there. That's a protest or whatever. I mean, obviously sometimes it's fairly evident, but I wanted to sort of quiet down that read a little bit. They're mostly not composites. They're more, I mean, I use, generally speaking, like not very high resolution photos because some of them are mine, but some of them are found. And even my photos, like I'll often have a huge photograph and I'll take a tiny section of it. So the resolution is not very high, which means that I have to sub in a lot of information. I have to interpolate a lot. So that, the backpack that girl is wearing is partly her backpack, but also a backpack that I found on the internet and kind of smushed them all together. The painting that we were looking at earlier with all the hands, a lot of those hands are based on my own hands because the images weren't clear enough for me to really get the level of specificity that I needed. So do we want to go to the next wall? So I wanted to ask you, and this is not like a ringer question. I genuinely don't know. Do you have rules for how you compose stuff? Or is it just what feels right?
No, I mean, it's a lot of intuitive, like what feels right. I think it goes back to the image I showed of the dancers. I think there's a lot of like going out of the frame and coming back in and things almost touching and things almost, and then pulling apart. And I think I do that all the time, but it is like this gut feeling, and I move things around kind of quickly, and they usually happen pretty fast, the initial placement. And I guess that's a rule, that it has to be kind of instinctual and fast, and then I slow it down. And the color choices and the scale and the other details that's what takes a long time. I have like a similar question, and you kind of touched on it on the last one, but do you have rules also about limiting certain things and details in your work?
I try to take out most identifying details. So this is probably the body of work that I've done that has the least like pattern in it. The fewest number of, there's not really text. And in part that's because I'm trying to kind of limit the amount of information so that it's really about the figures. I think I have that Pontormo painting burned into my brain where everybody has these, beautiful, luminous, solid robes. And I love, I love the simplicity of that. So there is certainly like an aesthetic choice to it, but also a lot of it is just to, again, like slow down the read and make it more about the faces and the gestures than about identifying where people are.
So in yours, how did you make your color choices? And is it connected to this event or place?
It is not connected. I think that this is one place where like your influence has really come into my work. The way that you use color, your color so often is like about creating a mood, and just in like a I love the thing that you said about, was it the Pivolotti Wrists? The, I can't remember exactly what the quote was, but, you know, the idea of color as, you know, this kind of definitional mood setting element versus something that has a sort of symbolic meaning. So your color, you know, this is like a much darker palette, I was saying earlier, than I'm used to seeing from you. Then I kind of remembered that, oh, yeah, actually, she did do some work that was in this vein. But how did you decide to work with this darker background?
I think I was more interested in pulling out these shapes and thinking of them as like pieces and constructions, and really taking them away from the natural environment. And a lot of the other, when I take photographs and use these, I'm using the natural light and so like it sort of just feels right to keep it in a lighter palette. And with these, when my son walked in and saw those darker spaces, he just said it perfectly. He said, like, the background feels endless. And I wanted to have that background space be kind of separate and illuminate the objects. And then this like amazing thing happened that I did not know was going to happen, which is that with this darker ground and the glass in front of it, it makes this mirror quality, which you can see. But also able to kind of see ourselves in it and see the people, you know, behind us, and like bringing in your paintings and the environment within the piece. And so the space just gets deeper and deeper as you look at it.
I also wanted to ask you, I mean, you sort of touched on it with the mirror thing, but I feel like, you know, for someone who's a digital artist, or primarily working in digital media now, your work, like its physical presence is so important, and you know, things like scale and stuff. So how do you think about the differences between the way something appears on a screen and how you respond to it when it's right in front of you?
I mean, I have to do, normally I do, and especially the Comcast that you saw was all a little bit large. I mean, it was almost life size, but I do a lot of printouts. I have to take it away from the screen and print out even on like bad paper, just so I can see the scale and see how it relates to, you know, your own physical body with the scale of the images. These are a little bit smaller than, I mean, I'd like to see these maybe even print larger too, but I like especially looking at them with your paintings. They like draw you in a little bit. They're a little more intimate to me to have them at this scale. So did I answer that question?
Yeah. I also love, you can sort of see it from the side, but there's that strange thing that happens where head on the backgrounds look black, and then when you see it out of the corner, this sort of glow of an undertone comes through. And I was thinking about that in connection with, you know, a screen, and wondering if the color feels more, like, does it feel like it's slower in person or
much slower in person?
Much slower in person.
Yeah.
I love that. When you're actually in the gallery, the way that you see it more out of the corner of your eye in your peripheral vision than you can see it head on, which is such a strange.
Well, and I also think in person and in real life, the color shifts throughout the day too, or whoever's in the room and what they're wearing, or who they are, and on the screen it's always the same. So there's something much more stable and something much more that feels more like alive when it's printed on this warm paper.
Yeah. So these are based on Instagram images. So as I think has been a theme of this talk, like your usual process is so incredibly labor intensive. So how does Instagram connect with that practice? And I was also wondering, do you edit for Instagram or is it just straight from the camera?
They're straight from the camera, and I love doing them. And I was really kind of focused on it this last year and in the summer, and until this show opportunity came about. But the Instagram, I mean, it's so immediate, but it's doing all the things that like it's allowing me to remember, a certain moment that are feeling, and then I just love, like, in this time of isolation, how it can be this connector to, like, so many people that are on the call right now, and thinking about how maybe people can relate to this, some of these little moments too. But I mean, it is kind of refreshing to have this pace along with the more long, laborious, more intensive pieces that I'm working on. I truly enjoy working in Instagram. But the other thing is that I really, I haven't ever printed them together, but when I'm in Instagram, sometimes I'm like reacting to somebody else's post or to the one prior to the image that I posted, like thinking, like still wanting to kind of continue a thought. And so that's why I paired these together, because they're all kind of making one, a little bit larger of a moment. So with your squares, mm-hmm. While you're working, each one of these is a different group of people. As you're working, this might sound a little strange, but do you develop relationships with these people that you're painting? And some of them like aren't like you at all. So like, do you start to understand them better? And like, do you find yourself being more empathetic to them and as you work?
Yeah, I think definitely. And that's one of, even when it's people that I'm not, that I don't feel, like you said, very connected to, I try to find things to feel warmth in. So, and so, with some paintings, it's harder than others, for sure. For instance.
Can we just stop here?
But this was also, I loved making this painting. It was really joyful at the same time that it was a little bit like nausea inducing. I think, for some reason, like, I find my entry point often in hands and gestures, like more than faces, and that somehow becomes this connector for me. The way that people, I don't know, it sounds silly, but the way that people sort of hold their hands and point and stuff, it just feels so human. And sometimes I'll get, that's the sort of point where I can sort of become engaged with a figure and then can move out from there. That's another that was like I don't know if I have any hands in that. I wonder if that impeded my ability to care for those men.
But this is where the question came about. Like, do you feel something a little bit more after painting? We all have to figure out how to be friends with all these people.
Thank you guys so much. And now I'd like to open up questions for the audience to turn on their cameras and microphones and ask questions themselves. To ask a question, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of the screen under reactions, and you'll be called on in order. For those of you who would prefer, you can continue to enter questions through the chat, and they will be asked on your behalf. We actually had questions come in through the chat already, and the first one was from Nicole Henderson for Mary. Mm-hmm. Nicole asks, how do you choose the images or figures that you paint, or how have they changed from earlier days to now, and how has COVID also changed that? And do you work on several parts of the painting, or one piece, one painting at a time?
Hi, Nikki.
Yes, she can also.
This is my my wonderful niece. So okay, how do I? Let me go through again. So how do I choose the figures? For is that the first question? How do I choose my subjects?
Yeah, and how has that changed since your earlier days of painting to now, and between, you know, before COVID and after COVID?
So like all these images, obviously, were gathered before COVID. I don't know. I'm sure intuitively some of the images that I was drawn to might have changed post COVID, but I think there are only a few of these paintings that were fully begun before or post COVID. But there are a lot that I kind of, you know, continued to work on. But I choose them. So you know, a decent number of them are spaces that I've been in, you know, photographs from my own archives. And then others, you know, I just, when I find interesting images, I have like, I'm a hoarder. And I go through and go back and go back and go back and go back. But sometimes it's more like about a mood. You know, I'll feel like I want to have something that feels like a moment that's maybe on the edge of turning bad, you know, and I'll kind of like go through until I see something that maybe resonates in that way. So it's almost more that less that my process for picking figures has changed, and more that just the context has changed the way they feel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Also from the chat, Stephanie Abrams, I believe, had a question for Mary about how you use photos. If you could speak a little bit more about using photos to inform your paintings, because I believe you guys talked about like using it as a composite and everything.
Yeah, so I mean, the photos are obviously like the main reference point. I usually use, you know, just a section of a photograph that I have, and there's a lot of eliminating. And then there's also a lot of, you know, like interpolating and stitching things together from life. So it's more that I use other sources to try to make something feel seamless, to kind of fill in the gaps, but try to keep, you know, because especially if I'm thinking about like the energy of a particular moment, a particular group of people. With these paintings, it feels weird to bring in someone from a space that has a different kind of energy. So for the most part, if I bring something else in, it's because I'm looking at something that's blurry or doesn't make sense, and I need to, you know, I need to sub it or rework it.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing that these are paintings and not photographs. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't tell from far away, you know. And then Kathleen Schaefer had a question for both of you. And the question is, do you feel there's a spiritual or metaphysical aspect to your work?
Sarah, do you want to answer that?
I mean, I want to say yes, because that has to be there, but I don't have like a lot of, I think that do you have something to say, Mary?
I mean, I feel like Sarah's work is so metaphysical, you know, I mean, the whole time I was sort of stumbling trying to talk about our work, but the idea of, you know, the juxtaposition of the like the tiny and the infinite, you know, the close up and the sort of impossible to reach is so, I mean, that's so metaphysical and so has such a sort of like spiritual connotation to me.
I will say with like these new colors and the dark, the like subtle, you know, shifts from like a dark green to a blue, they take a long time to focus, and that's kind of like you have to sort of look deeper at them and inside to sort of see what those subtle shifts are. And so that has like some spirit. It does, yes, I guess is yes, but I don't really know how to go beyond that.
I mean, they reward patience for sure.
Yeah.
If anyone has any other questions, of course, please feel free to turn on your microphone and your video to ask the artist. There's another question for both of you is why you both choose squares for these works, and if you primarily work in squares.
Do you want to take that and I'll chime in?
I mean, for me, I don't always work in squares, but for this show, I really wanted to work in that format, and it kind of started with Instagram and, you know, where I've been working for the last year, and it has been in that square format, and that's how we're like kind of, I mean, for me, it's like how I'm connecting with all of my community and friends through these like square pictures that I send. So I wanted to try to build these spaces in that format.
Yeah, I was always, you know, in school taught that, you know, squares are like a really difficult kind of compositional format. And for me, they're really, I mean, it's just very, very hard to figure out how to compose in a square. There's something sort of uncomfortable about it. And for these crowds, so if there's obviously the Instagram reference, right? Our eyes are so trained to see things in squares, in a way that they, you know, they didn't used to be. I mean, it's really not like a common format in painting or photography or film or whatever. So there's that, but then there's also, for me, the sort of the discomfort of a square and squeezing people into a square. I think was appealing, you know, because you felt you can't really judge the size of the crowd. It feels like people are kind of pushed together a little bit more by that tense format.
Yeah, so anyone use yourself?
Yay, it's nice to see people.
Fantastic show.
Can
you hear me?
Ken gets the Good Brother Award. You get the gold star.
Love you both.
Very spiritual, by the way. I think, Sarah, I'm more familiar with your work, so I'll just say that it seems to me that in the fineness of focus on those, like particularly on those blossoms and what's in the show, those things are just, I don't know, they're like plum blossoms in Japanese haiku or something. They just float up there. They're really like, I don't know, objects of contemplation and feeling. And the way they end up sort of stuck between the viewer and the room, and you're not sure which is more real than the other because of the reflection. It's just really, it's fantastic.
Does anyone else want to ask any
Yes,
questions?
I have a question for Sarah. I love your project in the Comcast Center. I've never seen it, but those photos are stupendous. And is there any opportunity of a tour or access to others to visit and see them? do you have any access to take others in there?
It might be open. I can find out and email you. I mean, if I can get you can email me.
Okay.
But yes, that would be great.
Okay.
I'm sure yes, I have contacts, but it is the thoroughway to the two buildings. So I'm guessing that they're open now for some portion of the day.
Okay, because I imagine the scale, you have to walk it and feel it as you go through those corridors and experience it, and it's very cinematic.
Yeah,
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, well, most of your work seems cinematic with the mirrors and the dimensional quality, almost like a hologram floating the flowers or the foliage onto an illusion without much. It's not using much, tricks or anything either. It's a very simple procedure with the image in the mirror.
One person in that installation looked at it. Actually, the printer who they print like bus wraps and giant prints, and one of the longest one is 65 feet, a continuous print, and I don't know what they were thinking, but once they had like 7 people installing it as they're rolling out the print, and he said, "Wow, you found like the most perfect day. Everything was in bloom." I thought it was one photograph, and it was made up of like 400 photographs. Yeah. I like that people don't really see how complicated it is. And maybe that goes back to the spiritual part. Like it shouldn't feel like you shouldn't have to figure anything out. You should just kind of take it in.
Yes, and technically you also do not see any strips of lighting. So do you have is there a diffuser on the print, or is it a well or space behind that has a diffuser?
It's all little LED lights behind, and then there's I'll have to walk you down, but there's like multiple layers. There's a frosted plastic layer, and then the color print, and then a clear print. I think there's 4 layers, and then the whole wall is lights. Not designed by me, like engineers involved in that. But yes, you can email me. I'd love to. Anybody I would love to go there.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
So I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is I'm a good friend of Sarah's, but these questions are for Mary. There was one painting of yours, which was a lot of hands. And I noticed that one person was holding their hand in the form of "I love you" in sign language. And I'm wondering if the other hands were sign language images or.
If they are, I don't know, and I would love. That just told me something really cool about my painting that I didn't know. And
yeah, the first one, the one in the front, says "I love you." Yeah. And the other question I have is, there's so many images of people. I mean, do the people ever come to you and say, "Oh, I'm in your painting," or? That
has happened. So it's happened a bunch of times, and mostly it's not true. So it happened. There was one time when I had a person who was like a totally fictive, like a composite person. This was an earlier painting, and someone was like, "Oh, I totally know that guy," and I was like, "He does not exist," which was really cool. But I had my last show, a guy went to see it and told the gallery director, "Oh, those are my friends," and they told me, "This guy says these are your friends," and I was like, "No, it's probably not. That people say that a lot," and he was like, "No, they really are." And then he texted it to somebody, and they were like, "No, that's." So a guy happened to wander in, and I'd always thought that if that happened, someone, I would get in trouble, but they were delighted. They were happy.
Okay. All right.
And it was not a flattering painting, so.
Oh. Well, thank you. It's a wonderful show. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
This is a good place to stop. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Mary and Sarah, especially for sharing your work with us. Design for Living Again is up until April 3rd, and the gallery is open by appointment, and you can sign up through the Calendly link that has been put in the chat box. So yes, thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.